Hello and welcome to this brief video in which we're going to take a close look at the subject of tyre emissions. I'm therefore delighted to have with me Nick Molden, who's founder and CEO of the company Emissions Analytics and an expert in tyre emissions. Nick, thank you for joining me. Firstly, the general perception amongst the public is that the electrification of vehicles is solving the air quality problem, but we know that it's not as simple as that. And we're starting to learn more about the importance of tyre emissions. So I wonder if you could start by briefly explaining why tyres are a potential problem for health and the environment.
Sure. Hi, Graham. Thanks for hitting on really a vital question. And a lot of it comes down to the weight of the vehicle. We've come through a world where tailpipe emissions have been nothing to do with vehicle weight, but most of what's left, now we've solved most tailpipe emissions, are related to weight, and tyres is the most important one of those. And roughly speaking, an electric vehicle is about a quarter heavier, 25% heavier than a standard vehicle, and it gives about 25% more tyre emissions. Now, that might not be a problem at all if tyre emissions are really small. 25% increase on something small is still something small. But that's not the case. And in fact, tyre emissions are getting close now to being the single biggest source of emissions from vehicles in use. It's the great unappreciated emissions from vehicles. Everyone thinks about the tailpipe when you say vehicle emissions, but actually quietly vehicles are shedding on average about 100 milligrams for every kilometer they drive of tiny invisible particles. Now, we're not talking big chunks of rubber that you can see. There are a few of those, but that's not what's so important. It is a huge number, in fact, billions of ultrafine nanoscale particles which are being released into the air.
Now, sorry to interrupt, Nick. Does that include PM25, which is regulated in many places and which the WHO says for which there's no safe limit?
Well, and here's the really interesting dilemma with tyre emissions. They create, we think, relatively little in the PM2.5 fraction.
Oh.
So for regulated air quality, they're not that bad. And that's why cities are getting better and better, fewer violation days, and councils are thinking, phew, problem solved, relax. But PM2.5 is only one measure of particle pollution. And tyres for air, the big problem is these ultrafine, particularly below 100 nanometers in size. So much smaller. They stay in the air much longer. We inhale them very readily and they cross into the brain and into the blood. We've even found these particles at the top of the Colorado mountains in the US. So we know they travel huge distances, but it's unregulated. So it's a big problem, but it's unregulated, and that is proving a dilemma for regulators.
Okay, so obviously the physical particulates that are being produced are a problem. Is there a chemical or hazardous aspect to this?
Well, this is the bit which takes it into another order of magnitude of complexity and potential problem. Again, if I contrast it to tailpipe emissions, we worry about particles there, but they are like little tiny bits of carbon, which are fairly inert. Whereas tire particles, although they're small and round and black, they are actually made of rubber and additives, and they're not inert. So initially they spray off the car as particles which we can inhale, but once we've inhaled them, they then shed, or what's called leach. They release the chemicals inside them into the body. And most of those chemicals are derived from crude oil. So you're essentially inhaling little tiny bits of things derived from crude oil. They release their chemical payload over time. So you have this secondary effect, which happens over a period of time inside the body, completely unknown to you. We found 410 organic compounds in a typical tyre. We're talking that number of compounds, most of which are not really well understood by science. We've not done toxicological experiments with them. So we're effectively releasing these unknown entities into the air, and we're inhaling them. And we've done a lot of experiments now, chemically reverse engineering what's in the tire. What are the chemicals? How hazardous are they potentially? What happens in the environment? What leaches out? What chemical reactions happen in the atmosphere to create something else? That's very much ongoing work. So far, we've gone through 500 tires in Europe and the US. So we're building this massive data bank to pull apart this problem. We've made progress, but it's still early days on a very complex chemical odyssey.
So this is a major challenge for the tyre industry per se. And what's actually being done about it?
The immediate pressure is coming from California. So they've honed in on this chemical called 6-PPD, which is a preservative put into tires, but which has been linked to massive die-off of the coho salmon on the west coast of the US. So California has legislated to force tire manufacturers to investigate alternatives to 6-PPD. It doesn't require finding a solution, but it requires them doing the research. If they don't do the research, they can't carry on selling tires in California. That inevitably will propagate around the US and possibly further afield as well. So you've got that pressure on the chemistry. At the same time, Europe is putting pressure on the physics. So they are going to put a limit to say, well, cars might emit 100 milligrams per kilometer as they drive. Well, there's going to be a limit value at 80. The value hasn't been set yet, but it'll be something like that. So it'll try and get rid of the worst, highest emitting tires by mass. So, in a sense, there's a pincer movement on the industry, one on the chemistry, one on the physics, but it is really early days. The regulators are learning how to regulate. And frankly, there's still a lot of scientific gaps that we're racing to fill as quickly as possible. Because one thing I fear as well is over-regulation. If they regulate the wrong things, let's say they regulate the things which aren't the biggest issue, a huge amount of effort will have been diverted in the wrong place. So possibly the one thing that gets me out of bed every morning is making sure we ask the right questions about tire emissions. And I think collectively, the industry and academia are often not asking the right questions right now.
So what do you see the role of your company, Emissions Analytics, in this?
Well, the first thing to emphasize is we're completely independent. And our mission is to provide the right data so people can make the right decisions to solve the environmental and health problem, but with the least impact on the industry and consumers. We don't want tires to be twice as expensive, but the environmental issue must be solved. So how to do it in the quickest, most efficient, fairest way possible. And we do that through the power of data. So we have a lab near Oxford, which is based on two-dimensional gas chromatography, a very advanced analytical technique where we can take bits of tread rubber and work backwards and find out what's inside. And as much as possible, how was that tire made? By doing that, we can inform regulators how tires work. We can also show tire manufacturers who's got best-in-class formulations. There are some tire manufacturers which use less than half of the 6-PPD than average. So what are they doing that allows them to reduce the amount of 6-PPD? So we can provide a genuinely useful service to the industry to help them on their road to making their tires less toxic.
And are there other ways in which you're helping to share information and knowledge in this subject matter?
Yeah, there's a huge amount of academic research going on around the world at the moment. There's about a new academic paper published every day of the week. And that's a huge task just to keep on top of that. So what we do is we have a team of specialists who review that all the time, and we publish a quarterly subscription publication called Tire Insights. It digests it all down, writes it in plain English, in a sort of 50-page report that gives you everything you need to know about the state of the science. And it moves on really fast, and that's why we update it every quarter and deliver that to subscribers.
Okay, so it's obviously a very big subject. Presumably, there are academic and industrial conferences covering these issues.
Oh, well, there are lots of tire conferences, but historically they've been very much from the perspective of how to make and sell a tire. Um, the gap was the really raised a sharp focus on the environmental emissions dimension, which is why we launched our emissions and sustainability in 2024. So we run that in Europe and we run that in America, and we've just completed the two for 2025. They've expanded and really delivered, I say, a really positive platform for interaction between industry regulators and academics. We're just about to announce the dates for the 2026 events, which are in Berlin and in California, and we're expecting, a further growth in those. Just reflecting the sheer number of people who are looking at this and the way this topic is going up the regulatory and political agenda. It's not an understatement to say that within, I think, 5 years, that this will be the dominant emissions from vehicles that people will be worried about.
Okay, and so when is the next of those events?
We're just about to, in a few days' time, to announce the date. So it's going to be June 2026 in Berlin, and then actually in April in California. So
Okay,
watch out on our website. That will be announced in the next week or so.
okay, that's great. Thanks so much for your time, Nick. Lovely to meet you.
Great. Thanks, Graham.